1955. In a world divided by the color of skin, the United States was still firmly held in the grip of racial segregation. Jim Crow laws dictated where a black person could walk, eat, sit, or even look. Interracial relationships were not just frowned upon, they were dangerous. A black man caught in the wrong place with a white woman could be beaten, imprisoned, or worse. The South was especially brutal in enforcing these unwritten rules, but the North, while less violent, was still no refuge. Oliver Bryant learned these lessons from a young age. Born into poverty in a small southern town, he spent his life watching men like his father struggle under the weight of a system designed to keep them subservient. His father was a factory worker. His mother a tired woman who spent more time scrubbing floors than resting. Oliver learned from childhood to fix machines alongside his uncles, learning how engines breathed and groaned under the weight of labor. By the time he was 18, he became a mechanic in a small auto repair shop, one of the few jobs where a black man could earn an honest living without serving a white boss face to face. Oliver was tall and lean. His skin was dark, like polished mahogany, and he carried a quiet confidence that could be unsettling to those accustomed to subservience. He had seen what happened to black men who looked too long at white skin. That was until Sarah Whitmore appeared. Sarah had never known poverty. Born into a prominent white family, she spent her childhood in silk dresses and expensive shoes. Her days were structured by etiquette lessons and social events designed to mold her into the perfect Southern wife. Her father, Charles Whitmore, was an influential man, a businessman whose wealth came not only from investments but from the power he held over others. He believed in bloodlines, in purity, in the supremacy of those who shared his skin color. But Sarah never felt at home in her father's world. She grew up suffocating under the weight of expectations she didn't want to meet. She was supposed to be quiet, obedient, demure, but instead she was curious, restless, always looking for something beyond the perfect life laid out for her. The night she met Oliver, she was 18. The summer heat clung to her skin as she put on a dress she was told was too daring, too revealing. The air smelled of whiskey and cigarette smoke as she entered a dimly lit basement where the music of rebellion played jazz, smooth and electric notes, winding like whispers of defiance. The party was one of the few places where the color lines blurred. Young people, black, white, and every shade in between secretly gathered, sharing drinks, laughter, and glances they would never exchange in daylight. It was there Oliver first saw her. She was nothing like the white women he had been warned about. There was no fear in her eyes when she met his gaze, no hesitation in the way she moved toward him. Her blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her blue eyes glowed with something dangerous. Curiosity, excitement, defiance. She asked his name. He hesitated. She smiled, and suddenly, Oliver found himself speaking, his voice low and cautious, as if testing the air between them. They talked for hours, their words flowing easily in the space between them. She was fascinated by the world he came from, the way he spoke, the way he thought. He was wary, but he was intrigued by her boldness, the way she seemed untouched by the fear that governed his own life. It was intoxicating, it was foolish, it was inevitable. When the night ended, she told him she wanted to see him again. He knew he should walk away, but he didn't. The first time her father saw them together, it was by accident. Oliver was working late at the auto shop when Sarah appeared at the edge of the garage, her pale skin illuminated by the streetlight. His heart constricted as he looked around. His pulse pounded in his ears. She shouldn't be there. It was unsafe. But before he could usher her away to the side, a black car pulled up. Charles Whitmore stepped out. The world seemed to stop. Oliver saw the moment recognition dawned in the man's eyes, how his face twisted with rage, how his body tensed with an anger that only white men had the privilege of expressing. Sarah tried to speak, but her father silenced her with a look so cold it could have frozen the summer air. Then, without a word, he grabbed her arm and pulled her away. Oliver didn't move. He knew better than to follow. The next morning, he found a note. "Stay away from my daughter." It wasn't a warning, it was a threat. And for the first time in his life, Oliver realized he wasn't afraid of white men like Charles Whitmore. He was afraid of what he was willing to risk for Sarah. The next few weeks were hell. Sarah was forbidden from leaving the house. Her every move was tracked, every phone call intercepted, as if acknowledging her existence would somehow eclipse his. Her mother said nothing, only watched her with unreadable eyes. Sarah tried to fight. She argued, she screamed, she pleaded. But her father's will was law, and there was no court that would side with a daughter who dared to defy the man who owned her world. Yet she found a way. A letter slipped into a messenger boy's pocket, a whisper to a shopkeeper who operated outside the color lines, a late-night rendezvous when the world was asleep. She found Oliver again, and this time she told him what he already knew. Her father would never allow them to be together, but she had made her choice, and she chose him. It was a reckless decision, a dangerous one. A white woman running away with a black man was not just scandalous, it was a crime. There would be no mercy, no understanding, no forgiveness. But love never cared for laws. And so, in the dead of night, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and fire in their hearts, they ran. They ran from the chains of her father's power, from the weight of a world that would never accept them. They ran toward a future that offered no guarantees, no promises, no security, only the hope that together they could carve out their own life. Little did they know, the real danger was just beginning. The night air was heavy with their decision. Her hands trembled as she clutched the small suitcase she had secretly packed, filled with only the barest necessities: a dress, a few coins, a photograph of her mother she wasn't sure why she'd taken. It was absurd how little of her life she could carry with her. Everything she knew, her home, her name, her status, she was leaving behind. Oliver stood at the edge of town, waiting under the shadows of a deserted train station. He had no suitcase, no photographs. His whole life had always been light enough to carry. When she saw him, she wanted to run to him, throw herself into his arms and let the fear vanish. But she held steady. There was no time for softness, no time for hesitation. They had only one chance to disappear. The train that would take them north was due within the hour. It was a freight train bound for Factory Town, where mixed-race couples were uncommon but not illegal. It was their best bet. Sarah looked back one last time, half expecting to see her father's men storming the life she'd just left. But the streets were empty. Still, the fear remained. Oliver took her hand roof, calloused but warm and strong. They boarded the train, hiding among crates and sacks of grain. No one saw them leave. No one knew where they were going. For the first time in her life, Sarah was free. The journey was long and grueling. They rode in darkness, their bodies aching from sitting in the cramped space between cargo crates. The sound of the train wheels hammered against Sarah's bones. Each clack was a reminder that there was no turning back. Oliver barely spoke. He was always listening, always watching. Each time the train stopped, he tensed, expecting the sound of approaching footsteps, expecting the doors to slide open and reveal men with guns, ready to separate them. But no one came. By the second night, they reached Illinois. Factory Town was a far cry from the elegant streets of Sarah's childhood. The air was thick with smoke, the streets lined with soot-stained buildings. The people were worn down by long hours of labor, but here they were just another couple. No one looked twice at a white woman standing next to a black man. It wasn't acceptance, it was indifference. And indifference was enough. They found a place to stay in a cramped boarding house where the walls were thin and privacy was non-existent. Their room was barely big enough for the narrow bed they shared, but it was theirs. Oliver found work at the local steel mill, working 12-hour shifts. Sarah found work as a seamstress, her fingers calloused from long hours of sewing. It was hard, grueling, she knew. But she never complained, because for the first time, she had chosen this life. The wedding took place in a tiny church on the outskirts of town. There were no guests, no flowers, no music, just the two of them, and a preacher who looked at them with a mumbled pronouncement of vows. There was no ring, no celebration, just a quiet exchange of promises, made not for the world, but for each other. When the ceremony ended, Sarah stood outside the church, looking up at the sky, feeling the weight of the moment settle in her chest. She was no longer Sarah Whitmore, daughter of privilege. She was Sarah Bryant, wife of a black man in a world that would never fully accept them. And yet, she felt lighter than she ever had before. The first year of marriage was a test. Factory Town was safer than the South, but that didn't mean it was kind. Oliver's colleagues didn't know what to make of a man who married a white woman. The women in town looked at Sarah with suspicious eyes, unsure if she was lost, confused, or just plain foolish. They were tolerated, but never welcomed. Money was always scarce. Some nights they went to bed hungry. Sarah learned to mend clothes until they were more stitches than fabric. Oliver worked overtime until his body ached, but they endured because love had carried them this far. Yet, love did not erase the fear. Sarah's father had not forgotten her. Letters arrived at the boarding house, each colder than the last. The first was a demand, "Come home now." The second was a warning, "You don't understand what you've done." The third was a threat, "You will regret this." Sarah burned them all, but the fear remained. Her father was not a man who accepted defeat. One day, he would find her, and she didn't know what he would do when he did. That fear seeped into her dreams. It whispered at the back of her mind when she walked through the market, when she saw men in suits looking at her too long, when she heard footsteps behind her at night. And so, without telling Oliver, she began to save money. At first, it was just a few coins hidden under the mattress, then a few bills tucked into the hem of her dress. She told herself it was nothing, just a precaution, a habit born of fear, not doubt. But deep down, she knew the truth. She had chosen Oliver, but a part of her still feared that one day she would have to leave him behind. Years passed, and life in Factory Town settled into a rhythm. It was never easy, never truly comfortable, but it was their life. Oliver worked himself to exhaustion, returning in the evening with aching muscles and hands stained with soot. Sarah sewed clothes until her fingers bled. Her once soft hands were now calloused. They built a life together, a fragile world piece by piece. And then came the first child. Sarah had never been so scared. She had expected joy, imagined the moment she would place the newborn in Oliver's arms and feel the warmth of their growing family. But instead, she felt something entirely different: guilt. Because looking at her son, she couldn't stop thinking about the child she had left behind. She was 17, a different girl in a different life. Her family had kept the pregnancy a secret, hiding her behind closed doors, telling friends and relatives she was sick, that she needed rest. She was never given a choice. When the baby was born, a boy, just like this one, she was barely allowed to hold him. Her father had arranged everything. A quiet adoption, a careful payment to ensure no records, no connection to the Whitmore name remained. Sarah cried for weeks, but over time, she learned to bury the pain. She told herself it was for the best, that the child would have a better life without her, without the burden of scandal. And then she met Oliver and buried that past beneath a new life, a new love. But now, holding her newborn son, the past came flooding back. She had another child out there somewhere, a son who had been lost before he had a chance to know her. She never told Oliver. She couldn't. The weight of that secret settled into her bones, a quiet, gnawing guilt that never quite left her. Their son, Isaac, grew quickly. His skin was a rich blend of his parents' colors. His eyes were sharp like his father's, his smile soft like his mother's. He was the first thing they had ever truly created together, a living, breathing testament to their love. And yet, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She yearned for the child she had given away. She wondered if he looked like Isaac, if he had her nose, if he had Oliver's steady gaze. She wondered if he ever thought of the mother he never knew. She never spoke of it. Instead, she buried it deeper and poured herself into Isaac, into Oliver, into their life. But the past had a way of coming back, even when you tried to run from it. Years passed, and another child arrived, Margaret. From the very beginning, she was wild, loud, fearless, untamed. Her laughter rang through the narrow halls of their boarding house like wind through open windows. She carried none of her mother's softness, none of her father's quietness. She was a force unto herself, a hurricane wrapped in the skin of a little girl. But as Margaret grew, so did the weight of the secret Sarah carried. She often imagined the boy now a young man living in some distant town, perhaps in a home like theirs, perhaps with questions of his own. Who is he? Why was I left? She prayed he had been given a good life. She prayed he had never felt unwanted. And most of all, she prayed Oliver would never find out. But secrets are rarely content to lie still. Over time, they seep into glances, into silences, into the spaces between people. Oliver noticed. At first, he assumed it was exhaustion. Parenthood was demanding, and their life far from easy. But then he saw it. The distant look in her eyes, the way her voice caught when asked about her past, the way she tensed whenever someone mentioned adoption even in passing. Oliver was not a man who pried. He had always honored silence, understood that some wounds preferred to remain untouched. But this was different. This was his wife, and she was slipping away. One night, long after the children had fallen asleep, he found her at the kitchen table. She sat in the dim light, holding a torn scrap of fabric in her lap, staring at it as though it might answer a question she couldn't bring herself to ask. She didn't hear him at first. And in that moment, Oliver felt a kind of distance he hadn't known could exist between two people who shared a life. There were things she hadn't told him, things she never wouldn't for the first time, he wondered. Had he ever truly known his wife? Sarah had never believed in fairy tales. Even as a child, she understood that love and survival were often separate paths. But she had never imagined a marriage that required both. Oliver was a good man steady, patient, reliable. He worked 12-hour shifts at the steel mill, came home with grease under his fingernails and kindness in his voice. He never complained, he never faltered. And he loved her of that, she was certain. But love alone couldn't undo the truth. Because when Sarah had married him, it hadn't been for love. It had been for fear. She had grown up in a family where marriages were arranged quietly, if not officially. In old Southern households like hers where wealth came with pedigree, and daughters were ornaments to be traded, women didn't choose. They were chosen. Her father had spent years parading her before the sons of bankers, lawyers, and politicians. He appraised them like livestock, their lineage, their ambition, their arrogance. And Sarah had played her part. She smiled when expected, danced when asked, learned to make herself pleasing. Until she met Oliver. He was the first man who looked at her and didn't see a transaction. He didn't belong to her world, and that was precisely why she ran to him. Not out of passion, not out of love, but out of desperation. She feared the life awaiting her if she didn't escape, feared becoming her mother, feared being silenced into a beautiful cage. And yet, with time, love did come. It came quietly, like sunlight creeping into a dark room. She loved the way he kissed her forehead every morning before leaving for work. She loved how he cradled Isaac and Margaret in his arms, humming lullabies that vibrated low and steady, like the earth itself. She loved that he never raised his voice, even when he was angry. She loved the way he made her feel safe, perhaps for the first time in her life. But she had never told him the truth, that when she chose him, it wasn't from the heart, but from survival. And she told herself it didn't matter. That love had found its way to them, eventually. That the beginning didn't need to define the end. That all stories, even the broken ones, could still lead to something whole. But then came the whispers not from Oliver, but from the world around them. From the women at the market who still looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. From the men who smirked when he walked away. From the children who asked questions she didn't know how to answer. Mama, why do some people look at Papa like he doesn't belong here? Mama, why do other kids say I'm different? Mama, why does Grandpa never visit? And she had no answers, because the truth was ugly. The truth was that she had spent so many years trying to forget where she came from that she never considered what it meant for her to be between two worlds. And worst of all, she never told Oliver. She never told him that in those first few months when things were hardest, when she was exhausted and scared, she thought about leaving. She would look at the money she'd hidden, counting it over and over in the quiet hours of the night, wondering, is this enough to take the children and disappear? She never planned to do it, but the mere fact that she thought about it haunted her. Oliver was no fool. He saw the way she avoided certain questions. He saw the way she hesitated when he asked about her past, how she went silent about what made them different. And he wondered not only about her secrets, but about her love. Did she love him because he was her choice, or because he was her only escape? It was a question he was afraid to ask because he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Sarah convinced herself that the past was behind them. She had built a new life, a family, a home that, though humble, was safe. The world outside their walls still looked at them with suspicion, but inside they had found something close to peace. But peace was fragile, and the past had a way of coming back when you least expected it. The first letter arrived on an ordinary day. It was slipped under the door while she was out shopping. A thin, wide envelope lay on the wooden floor, like a ghost from another life. She stared at it for a long time before picking it up. There was no return address, just her name. The handwriting was unmistakable her father's. Her stomach churned as she tore it open. The words inside were short, cold. You don't understand what you've done. She felt sick. It had been years since she'd last heard from him. After she ran away, he'd sent letters demanding she come home, then letters threatening her, then nothing. She thought that meant he'd given up. She was wrong. For weeks, she waited for another letter, but it didn't come. She tried to dismiss it, but the weight of it settled in her chest like a stone. What did he mean? Was it just another attempt to control her, or something worse? She told herself not to worry. But then she saw the man. It was early evening. She had taken the children to the market, letting them chase each other between the stalls while she bought potatoes and fresh milk. And that's when she saw him, a white man in a suit, standing on the street corner.